All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us for the African Tea Time today. My name is Damaris Choti. I'm the coordinator of student and alumni programs at the African Studies Center, Michigan State University. It's my pleasure to welcome you all, and especially to welcome our presenter, who is not new to the African Tea Time at all. His name is Emmanuel Chima. Emmanuel is a doctoral student in the College of Social Work. I'm just pulling out here. And Emmanuel, I'm pleased to say that he is also the president of Kongamano, and Kongamano is the student organization that helps plan the African Tea Time events alongside the African Studies Center. So I've been working with Emmanuel for many years now. Yes, so I'm very happy that we had a chance to have him present. It's not his first time to present either. Emmanuel has been very generous with his time and commitment to participating within the African Studies community. And today, Emmanuel is going to talk about Tumaini Festival. That's a cultural production and transnational exchange at Dzaleka Refugee Camp in Malawi. I wouldn't spend time explaining or saying any more about the talk. What I will do, I'll give this opportunity to Emmanuel to tell us more about himself, anything else that he wants us to know, and then delve into the discussion. Thank you so much, Emmanuel. It's always a pleasure working with you, having you speak, and here's the floor for you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Choti. It's a pleasure working with you as well. I very much enjoy participating in the African Tea Time. And like Damaris said, I'm a doc student in the School of Social Work. I just took my comps, so I'm relieved, waiting to hear back. Yes, I'm studying social work, and my research area of interest is refugee psychosocial well-being. And until recently, my core focus has been this community in Dzaleka that I'm going to talk about. This Dzaleka is a refugee camp in Malawi, and it's a protracted refugee situation. And UNHCR describes a protracted refugee situation as one where you have 25,000 people or more living in a place for 5 consecutive years. Now, Dzaleka was established in 1994, so it is well past that 5-year mark. And the population is double that of the minimum for a protracted refugee situation. There's actually over 50,000 people living at Dzaleka Refugee Camp, and they're from East Africa mostly. So from the DR Congo, from Rwanda, from Burundi, there's people from Somalia, and also a scattering of people from different places that may not have as large representation. So I'm going to talk about the festival, specifically how it functions as a site of cultural exchange and transnational interaction. So I think a good place to start is for us to watch 2 short videos, 2 minutes each, that give you a good overview of the festival, but also give you a visual for the presentation. So I'm going to share my screen here and have us watch those 2 videos. Okay.
There are 51,000 people living in the refugee camp, mainly from the DRC, Rwanda, Burundi, Somalia, and many more countries. In 2008, I was forced to flee my home country, the DRC, due to political disturbances, and I moved to Malawi, where I now live as a refugee at the refugee camp. In Malawi, refugees do not have the freedom of movement, the right to work, the right to run businesses outside the camp, or the right to education in Malawi's public schools. When I arrived in Dzaleka, the situation was very difficult for refugees. Due to this, I was inspired to found Tumaini Festival. Promote the social, cultural, and economic inclusion of refugees Our flagship project is the annual Tumaini Festival, which promotes peaceful coexistence, mutual understanding, and intercultural harmony between refugees and the host communities, as well as boosting the economy of the communities at Dzaleka. We are planning a hybrid festival that will take place from the 4th to the 7th of November. And for this festival to happen, we are going to launch a crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter. And we will ask everyone to contribute financially and to share the link with their friends and family so that this festival can take place.
That was the first short video that I wanted us to see, and then see if I can find the other one. I had it queued up before. I'm just gonna stop sharing quickly while I look for it. Sorry for all the technical difficulties. Thanks for bearing with me as we proceed with our presentation. Okay, found it.
I think when you mention camp, refugee camp, people really expect that it's a place where people are just being kept and no, there's no real life, and it's just people away from home.
Tumaini means hope. Being a refugee means maybe many refugees are losing hope. They flee their country because of many reasons. Then with the Tumaini Festival, we refresh a little bit, refugees enjoy a little bit, and then they try to forget what happened in their birth country.
It is bringing people together from all walks of life, particularly, let's say, from the African circle. People are here and they're enjoying themselves.
Umai, yeah, they played some cool jazz. They performed songs in Tutumbuka. Though I didn't hear the lyrics themselves, but I could feel the feeling of the communication through the music song. So it's vibrant.
The refugees are just people like everyone.
I think I didn't have much of an awareness about what happens in Dzaleka and about Dzaleka itself. So being here and seeing like the cross culture and sharing of different bands, different music, it's very impressive.
They think that the camp is somewhere that cruel people are, but actually they're people like anyone. And they're kind people, I must say.
Festival, what I'm saying is perfect. It's awesome.
Having voice because you never regret it. I'm speaking from experience.
Just come, yeah. Come to the festival, it's interesting.
So those were the two videos that I wanted us to watch together. So
imagine what would happen if every person in the United States suddenly visited your website. Would it crash? Not if you built your...
Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Right, so I wanted us to have a visual of the festival so that it's not abstract as we talk about it. Because for me, this work is not just academic, but it touches on real lives, real people in a community. And so that's why I wanted us to see that video. So I'm going to share a brief PowerPoint just to situate the context of what I'd like to talk about. Okay, just a moment here. Okay, share my screen. Okay, so first of all, I would like to situate Malawi. I'm sure some of you are familiar with it, maybe not others not so much. So Malawi is a country located in Southeast Africa, highlighted in green there on that continental map. And then to the right, it's a more detailed map of Malawi. And as you can see, with Malawi being located southeast, it's strategically positioned to interact with East Africa as well as the South, because the refugees that come to Malawi are mostly from East Africa, and some of them go through other camps, like camps in Kenya, like Kakuma and others. There have also been camps in Tanzania and other places. So just situating globally where Malawi is and where the refugees are coming from. Some figures at a glance from UNHCR. So these stats are from 2021. As of that time, there were 89.3 million people displaced around the world. And that includes refugees, asylum seekers, and those internally displaced as well. So that's a broad figure encompassing all those different groups. But then this begs the question of how many refugees are there actually? And so from the same UNHCR stats, we are told there's 27.1 million of the 89.3 million displaced people are refugees, and half of whom are under the age of 18, which says a lot about the impact, the effect that displacement has on young people. And it's interesting to note here on this slide that it says at a time when 1 in every 88 people on Earth have been forced to flee, they're intensifying their work as UNHCR. So that's a lot, that 1 in every 88 people is forced to flee. That's an alarming statistic. Okay. Sorry, let me go back one slide. Let me see. Okay, here I wanted to further looking at context for the year 2021. 3 million people were displaced from Congo alone in 2021. And then from Mozambique, which surrounds Malawi on its southern side, that little dip you see in Mozambique there, that's Malawi, and tens of thousands of people were displaced there in 2021. So one of the solutions to displacement for refugee communities is refugee resettlement. It presents the opportunity for a long-lasting solution to the state of being displaced. But from those 20-something million people that were displaced, only 204,000 were resettled as of 2022. So the reality is that the majority of refugees do not get to start afresh in a new home country. The majority remain in protracted displacement, as is the case with the Dzaleka Refugee Camp that has been open since 1994. And its opening was precipitated by conflict in the Great Lakes African region, specifically the Rwandan genocide. But there's also been ongoing conflict in Eastern Congo. There's been disruptions in Burundi, and just in the region, conflict has. So that's why this camp came into being, starting off with a very small population that has ballooned over the years. And so the majority of displaced refugees remain, in these protracted situations. And this slide here is showing us that 74% are hosted in low and middle income countries, which speaks to the kinds of resources that are available to them, the quality of life. And then 69% are hosted in neighboring countries, which speaks to why Malawi, as a nation in Southeast Africa, has this sizable community of East African refugees. So more stats here from UNHCR. So the US is the largest resettlement destination in the world. It has historically always received the largest number of refugees. Even when there have been policy changes from one administration to the other, it still remains the top resettlement country in the world. And so some stats here. Also, in my other work that I've done within the School of Social Work, I've looked at how Michigan is a top receiving state for the US. It's in the top 5, as you can see from this slide here. And I wanted to draw our attention to the percentage of refugees coming into the US. 53%, 54 rather, are from Africa. And if you look at the top countries of origin for those refugees who settled to the US, the DRC is number 1. And so that just goes to show you the scope of the issue that is there. And then, let's see, I think I might have one more slide, or maybe not. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my presentation here. And I guess before we talk a little bit more about the thoughts that I have, could I get some reactions from you based off of those videos? Did you learn something new, or what stuck out for you? Any thoughts, anything you want to share? I'll be happy to hear it.
Okay, I had a quick question. I know you said, not you actually, from the clip, the person that, is it the first one? Was saying that, which is kind of obvious, that the refugees in Dzaleka do not have the right to education. I don't know how recent that clip is, but I was just wondering, maybe you're going to address it as we go. Also, is the situation getting better? Like, what's the education status for, access to education rather, status for the people in Dzaleka camp?
Yeah, I could chime in on that. So Malawi as a nation is party to the 1951 Refugee Convention, but it made some reservations when it became a party to that convention. And so it doesn't provide for certain things for the refugee community, but it doesn't prevent other parties from coming in to do so. So in the case of this camp, all of the education in the camp is run by the Jesuit Refugee Service. And the curriculum in those schools is the same as the national curriculum. So the government has absolved itself of the responsibility to provide for social services such as education, employment access, and things like that. But other partners of UNHCR have then come in to fill that gap. So there are schools in the camp, but they are run by UNHCR partners. Another one of their partners is the World University Service of Canada, who resettle a small number of refugees on university scholarships to Canada. So that's sort of the long and short answer, I suppose.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Can I add a question? Where is the camp located in Malawi?
So it's located about 27 kilometers from the capital, Lilongwe. So it's in the central region in Dowa district. So it's in a peri-urban area in that it's close enough to the city that there's an urban flair to it, but it also has the characteristics of a rural area in that there's limited access to power. The camp itself has no running water. People have to pump their water from the ground, and it's surrounded by a cluster of villages. So it's in a peri-urban location. It's about a 45-minute drive from the capital to the camp. So yeah, the festival has been happening for a while now. The videos that I showed you are dated, but they do reflect the current reality of the festival and the situation on the ground. And what I find striking about the festival is how it suspends the dichotomy of refugee and non-refugee. You know, it's an artistic space where people just come together to celebrate and display culture. And one of the reasons why Trésor, the founder, started this festival was to bring awareness to the issues that refugees face. So beyond it being an artistic celebration, it's also a critique of how refugees are hosted and treated in the nation. So the slur that is used for refugees in Malawi is ironically the same word that means Burundian. So refugees pejoratively are called Maburundi in Malawi. And I think this has to do with the fact that at a particular point in time, there was this influx of Burundians that came in. And so, you know, in describing them, people would just refer to them by their nationality. And it took on this negative connotation and became a slur. And so this presentation is based on a paper that I wrote that used a post-colonial lens to inquire into how the refugees are hosted in Malawi. And in that work, I talk about how it's ironic that the discrimination and the prejudice that refugees encounter is predicated on nationality, which itself was foreign until not too long ago. And looking at the history of Malawi, a significant percentage of the population can trace its roots back to the Congo basin in the 15th century. And so there's a genetic connection between the refugees that are there now and the hosting population. And really, this is true across Africa and different places of the world. People have always moved around. You know, these neat boxes that we have of nationality are just out of political expedience and convenience. They don't really speak to the unity of people or differences, if any. And so there's that, first of all, and then you have the fact that this reliance on these borders, these national borders, also disregards the fact that it's the colonial experience that separated people. So Malawi has also hosted a lot of refugees from Mozambique, and Mozambique surrounds Malawi on the south. And so it goes without saying that the border tribes or groups of people are one and the same, you know, more or less. So that's kind of where this idea of the transnational exchange and cultural production comes in that if you take a critical examination of the festival and the interaction, it seeks to sort of, it's a decolonizing strategy of representation, you know, showing that there's an underlying Pan-African identity almost that is being brought to the fore. And so Trésor has also been very vocal about this, and in advocating for the community at Dzaleka. He's been recognized by UNHCR, the World Economic Forum, and other bodies for his advocacy. And so he's become, you know, this voice for the refugees. And I really like that this festival goes beyond just bringing visibility to this community. There's also an economic impact, not only for the refugee communities, but like I mentioned, it's surrounded by other villages. And in comparison, the camp is more urbanized in a sense than the villages surrounding it. And so there's an economic impact even for the residents of the villages that surround the camp, who travel distances to come to the camp to engage in commerce and trade. So there's a lot that's going on. This camp has really become like a village of sorts. The main difference between the camp and the villages surrounding it, as you might have seen from the video, is that all the huts are clustered together in a smaller amount of space, whereas typically in a village setting, the huts are more dispersed in the rural areas because people have the land that they farm on right next to where they live, next to their dwellings. So it's less common to see a cluster of huts in a typical village. They tend to be spread out because you need space for your livestock, you know, for your cornfield, for your barns and all that. So the camp has also grown to become this village, but because of the way it's set up, the quality of life is also not very good, because when you have people living together clustered like that, you think about sanitation, waste disposal, challenges such as those. And I had some stats pulled up from the country office, the UNHCR country office, and it says they have a monthly average of 300 new arrivals. And so people are continuing to arrive at the camp. And of those 300, 62% are from DRC, 19% from Burundi, 7% from Rwanda, and 2% from other nationalities, 45% of which are women, 48% are children. So the percentage of men that are arriving is much smaller. And so all those stats, they speak to a host of issues affecting the community. And I think it's important that we have the option of refugee resettlement, but because it only reaches so few, a lot more effort needs to be targeted towards the work inside the camp. Because the reality is the majority of those 50,000 plus people are not going to leave the camp. Only a small percentage get to move on and start a new life. And so it's like winning the lottery. And even those that get to leave can't afford to put their life on hold as they wait to be resettled. The average wait time can go up to 15 years before it ranges from 6 to 15, somewhere there. So you can't put your life on hold, for 15 or even 6 years, hoping that you get resettled. And because there's a host of factors that go into meeting the criteria for resettlement, it's not necessarily those that have been there the longest that get resettled. And so the 300 people that are arriving monthly potentially displace one spot on the wait list for resettlement. And then when you have global factors affecting the resettlement process, that also has a ripple effect on the outcome of these individuals. For example, the previous administration had reduced refugee admissions, and with the US being the largest refugee resettlement destination, that made things even dire for people globally. And then you had COVID happen, and refugee resettlement was paused. And that number of 200,000 people being resettled to the US, that's globally. And if there's 50,000 people in this camp alone, in a relatively small country in comparison to others, for example, the reason why some people move from Kakuma in Kenya to the camp in Malawi is because the camp there is even bigger. Like, we're talking of hundreds of thousands. And so their chances of winning the lottery is felt to be better in a country like Malawi, where it still takes several years. And so all that collectively speaks to the fact that we need more advocacy for quality of life in the camps and programming. And that's why, for me as a social worker in training, I'm interested very much in the psychosocial well-being of refugees, not only post-resettlement in countries like the US here, but also especially pre-resettlement, because that's where vulnerability is more exacerbated. So that's sort of the snapshot of my work. This is not a typical presentation. I figured we'd keep it casual here at Tea Time. But let's open up the conversation. Like Damaris, and you asked some interesting questions, Marcy, and those will help, jog my memory, because I've been working on this camp for a while now. And so, yeah, I'll be happy to share and hear back from you all.
I found it very interesting that that the festival is held at the camp, and then there's always this sort of this thought of those who are living in the camps are being hosted by the country of Malawi, and so they are the guests in Malawi. And in this case, they're inviting others from Malawi and other places to be guests in their in the camp where they are the hosts. And I think that's a really cool way of switching it around. And you could see it in the video where the one woman from Malawi who came to the camp was like, wow, I mean, I knew it was here, but I didn't know really what it was all about. And that made me think about, I know in the beginning, Trésor said that some of the regulations are that they can't have work outside of the camp. Does that preclude them from having businesses that others from outside of the camp can come in and purchase from them? Or are there tailors? Are there, I mean, I know that there's got to be, right? But are people from outside the camp allowed to come in and use those services and contribute financially to the life in the camp?
Yeah, there's no restrictions around that. It's more in the formal sector. So there's a lot of informal engagement that happens. It's in the formal sector where you have those restrictions where people need permits and that kind of thing. But yeah, the camp, people come in from the city, other places to engage in. And you mentioned a very good example of tailors. There's a lot of good tailors from the Congo in the camp. That's the place to go if you want to get your outfits made, is the camp. Yeah,
good to know. Good to know. I'm going to keep that in mind.
Yeah, do take notes. So there's a whole lot of hair braiding happens in the camp. There's another skill set that's there. Until recently, there was one guitar maker from the DRC, and he was the only guitar maker in the country. And there was an article that was written about how it was a shame that somebody with a skill set like that is not being allowed to make a contribution. He was thankfully resettled to Australia and has been able to utilize his skills there. So there's a host of skills and abilities. I know there's exceptions have been made for like teachers and nurses and doctors, but there's no reason why exceptions shouldn't be made there should be no exceptions. Everybody should be allowed to work, really. There's also a market day on Tuesdays. They call it Mardi Marché, and at this market, it happens outside the camp. It's kind of between the camp and the surrounding community. And at that camp, people come from different parts of the area to sell their goods and offer different services. So that's a big market day in the camp. There's also a market day that happens in the trading center that's about 15 minutes from there. And then people from the camp then get to go to that other community and also sell their goods. But it's really in the formal sector that you see all these restrictions, like refugees can't incorporate big businesses. And also there tends to be the assumption that all refugees have no economic means. There's really people that are, it's a spectrum. There are people who have, means and others who don't, and those who are able to invest and, create a livelihood for themselves.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to know, with respect to resettlement, are they always taken out of Africa, or they are sometimes resettled in African countries? Because I'm wondering, there are other refugee camps in Africa, especially there is one in Ghana, and I'm thinking, so until they get resettled in those maybe in an European or American country, or in America, they just have to be there. No African countries are willing to accept them into their country.
Yeah, so historically, refugee resettlement has been one directional, from typically it's been from the global south to the global north. That's kind of been the pattern. And the idea is with resettling people, is you're helping them move to get to a third country other than the country that they first took refuge in. Because the country that they first took refuge in is usually within geographical proximity to where they're fleeing from. And so resettlement then takes them even further away and attempts to restore those lost protections. And it's also because these countries that they flee to initially are not offering local integration. So if, say, for example, like Malawi is very explicit about that, it doesn't integrate refugees, they cannot become citizens. And so if that option was there, they would, theoretically be resettled in the same country that they got refuge in. I know some countries have started, like Zambia, I know has started to resettle refugees. So and I think Uganda, I believe, is also starting or has started. And Rwanda has also become a resettlement destination. And so it's relatively new, but historically it's been that the willingness and openness to resettle refugees, the political will has not been there in a lot of places. And some places like the US have had a head start because of legislation. So after World War II, that precipitated the Refugee Act that the US instituted in 1953. And so that legislation has been there for a while. So they acted soon after the UN had their 1951 convention. The US also put in place its own legislation. And so having those mechanisms in place help with that. But yeah, you're right to say there are camps really everywhere, pretty much, because people are going to flee to their neighboring, nations.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome. Any other thoughts, anyone? Damaris?
Okay. Yeah, I was just, so generally, because I know that the refugee crisis is complex. Like, you don't know where to begin. We're talking about addressing issues within the camps. We're talking about resettlements and all this. But sometimes in the bigger picture, you wonder, now I'm asking you, not asking you, but just putting it out there as somebody that is in this field, social work, this is the area that you want to go to. What does it seem like? What's the future looking like for issues to do with the refugees? Because is it gonna stop? Like, I'm kind of asking you, are we gonna have peace in the world, which is a bad question and a big question for you. But the question is, for how long? Like, what do you think as a person who is entering in that field? How do you wrap your mind around the idea that we shouldn't be here in the first place? We shouldn't be having these refugees come in the first place.
Yeah.
Like, what needs to be done, really? I know it's peace. That's the one answer. But
world peace.
You know how you ask yourself this big question, like, for how long are we going to be here in this situation where around the world, and now we're talking about Malawi, that will be having the need of resettling refugees?
Yeah, there's action that's starting to gain traction at the policy level, especially, and that's where like advocacy is very important. So, for example, the UN itself has recognized that this is an ongoing issue. So recently, they put together the Global Compact, on refugee issues, and it's to push for other more sustainable solutions that can be extended to greater numbers. So, for example, pushing governments to integrate and resettle is one of them, because if you look at resettlement as a primary way of resolving this problem, you will notice that other factors like preferential treatment comes in. Not all refugees are equal. Not all displaced people are equal. So, for example, the idea of having refugee status, because when people initially flee and take refuge in another country, they're not all recognized as being bona fide refugees. You have to be vetted. You're considered an asylum seeker initially. Then you need to go through interviews with UNHCR officials, the local hosting countries, officials, and they award you refugee status, recognition that you are indeed a refugee. And then you need that status to then be eligible for refugee resettlement. So even in a camp like Malawi that has 50-something thousand people, the odds are, I used to have the exact stats, but at the time it was something like a quarter of the population had refugee status, and the majority, because even the process of getting that recognition can take up to 2 years to get that piece of paper that says, yes, you are indeed a refugee. So things like that. So first of all, you have to, be recognized as one, and then get resettled. And we see that that's not the case in some places. When there's conflict in other places, it makes the news really quickly. There's all this aid, people are going in, and so those are the realities of it. And so that's why pushing for other solutions like integration, even engaging with refugee communities, not to look to resettlement as the only way out, because a lot of people in the camps really pin their hope on resettlement. It's kind of like your life changes overnight, drastically, and that's a good thing. But and you don't want to take away that hope, but also realizing that people, life is happening now. This is reality now, and so what can be done now to help alleviate those hardships? And so pushing for integration is one of those. So I know I've read some literature on Uganda, kind of being proactive in that area, but at the same time you have to address issues of stigma and resentment that brew in those countries where the local population is also poor in some instances, and poverty is relative and hardship is relative, And so in some communities, see refugee communities receiving aid and all these things, they think, oh, but we're poor too. We have our own problems. This is our country. We bring you in here, we're doing you a favor, and now you're usurping us. And that's kind of the history behind Malawi's restrictive refugee policy. So Mozambique had a protracted conflict that lasted, I think, about 30 years or so. I forget the exact numbers there. Well, what happened was and Mozambique surrounds Malawi, on the south, to the south there. You had a mass influx of Mozambican refugees that came into the country. And this was in the 80s and 90s, such that 10% of the population were Mozambican refugees. And so there was this panic that happened. And this legislation was put into place, and it was designed in a way as to make those refugees go back, which happened. But that law remained on the statute books. And now you have other refugees from other countries. And even recently, you have Mozambicans having come back. But that restrictive legislation has remained. So there's been a lot of lobbying advocacy to have that changed. And also globally, redefining who a refugee is, that idea of, people fleeing for climate change reasons, economic reasons, other social reasons. Like, why should some people be more worthy of protection and support than others? And so finding fault even with existing frameworks and trying to push. The recent work that I'm looking at now is, undocumented populations in the US, and contrasting their experiences with those of refugee communities that are resettled from further away, So thinking about helping our neighbors globally, not just here, but even, wherever you are in the world, thinking about your neighbors, that charity begins at home. So I think a shift in perspective at least starts to show options. And I think the hard part, as with any change, is implementation. There's a lot of good plans that are signed and all these meetings and, something 2020 this or vision what, and it's like the implementation is the hard part. And so I'm really grateful for organizations like Jesuit Refugee Service that really look toward the communities that they serve in, because they have 3 pillars of service. It's accompaniment, service, and advocacy. So they come alongside the people they're serving, and really try to work with them with what they have. It's a community assets-based approach. As opposed, it's good to come in and give aid and offer like emergency relief, but sustainability is also important. So those are some of my thoughts, and that's why I want to be in that area. I direct my scholarship towards advocacy and visibility. Hopefully, that can inform policy, but the ripple effect, takes a while. But that's kind of my thinking on the matter.
Thank you so much. Just another quick question is that for the Dzaleka camp, what's the relationship like, if you happen to know, what's the relationship like between the community and people within the camp? And are they restricted from, let's say, transacting outside the camp? Are they restricted to being within the boundaries of the camp?
So it's changed a lot over the years. There have been periods of intense, for lack of a better word, hostility, and then periods of, recently there was a long period of indifference, such that you had, a good number of refugees informally move out of the camp into the cities and other places and set up small businesses. And when these businesses start to thrive, issues start to boil up. And so very recently there was a government directive that all refugees return to the camp and remain there. So for a while there was this sort of a reluctant coexistence, and there was no active violence, there was no xenophobia per se, but at the policy level, you were starting to see these issues. And I think refugees are often used as scapegoats for issues and problems. Not that there aren't any problems within the refugee community, but when you start thinking more broadly as a people group, you start to wonder what's going on. So I'd say the average person doesn't harbor any animosity, but I would say, groupthink can easily happen, with regard to a population that's seen as being sort of lesser in terms of the social hierarchy, because also that the category refugee, there's so many assumptions, because when you take away the category, refugees are people just like any other people. There's no difference. They're just human beings. But if you look at refugees through that lens, it's like it's a deficit perspective, and so that also creates problems. These are people that are engineers, lawyers, doctors, some of them, and even those that are not, their inherent worth and dignity is unquestioned. So those are some of the issues that go on.
Okay, I'm also wondering, like, aside the support they get from international bodies, do we have a case where like African governments of specific African countries coming in to support refugees, in, let's say, in Malawi and then in other African countries as well?
I would say through the African Union, I would suppose, because the AU also has its own convention conventions on displaced peoples and refugees, and I know Malawi is party to those. And so I believe the way those bodies operate is they draw funds from their member partners and use that money to support issues that are going on in those countries that are hosting nationals, because it's an issue of concern on the continent. It's a collective responsibility as well. But I would say, I think they could be more done. It's probably not a whole lot. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I had for you. I encourage you to continue to read up on the festival. I've written quite a bit on it. I'd be happy to share my writings on it. And yeah, like Marcy said, hopefully you can make it there one day, if not in person, at least visually. Yeah.
So, okay, if we're not leaving anyone out, I want to thank you so much, Emmanuel. I love your work.
Thank you.
It's just because it touches lives. And perhaps it's just the person I am. I just feel fulfilled when I do something that I know it's going to touch somebody's life directly. I know it's not possible for all of us to be in that same field as you are, or in that same line of work, but it's impressive that you're able to do it as a dissertation and also as something that you're passionate about. It's something that you would like to see change. It's a field that, or it's a field of study, I would say, that you're really interested in seeing things improve. So congratulations on starting this journey, and we wish you the best as you continue getting more information, as you collect your data in this study, and perhaps we look forward to you coming back at the end of it all and telling us what is it, what's changing, what hope do we have?
Yes.
What's the hope of the world? Yes.
Thank you, Damaris. It was always a pleasure to. I like that here at Tea Time, we can have conversations, and I also get insights when I come on and share, and I can go back to my drawing board and say, oh, I hadn't thought about that, and so
it does help, and that's where we encourage students, graduate students, community members to be able to use this as a platform to share knowledge about your project, your research, even if it's preliminary. It's a place that people can contribute and learn from the work that you're doing. So if you have friends, you or yourself, Sandra, and other people here that would be interested in presenting at Tea Time, feel free to reach out to us. We have a Kongamano website, but more directly, you can reach out to Emmanuel or myself, and we'll be able to communicate with you about how to do that. So thank you so much, everyone. And also thank you, Emmanuel, for leading us through this discussion. The recording will be shared in the African Studies Center YouTube channel. So please feel free to view it, feel free to share when it's up, and that should be either this Friday or early next week. So thanks, everyone, and bye-bye. See you again in the next Tea Time. Bye.
Okay, bye.